The emergency radio crackled to life at 11:47 p.m. on a humid Tuesday night in Phoenix, Arizona. All units, domestic violence in progress, possible assault with a deadly weapon. 2,847 Maple Grove Apartments. Unit 14B, multiple neighbors reporting screaming and sounds of breaking glass. Detective Sarah Martinez was 3 blocks away when the call came through. She'd been working the night shift for 6 years, but her stomach still knotted whenever domestic violence calls came in. These were the worst, unpredictable, dangerous, and often involving children. She pressed the accelerator of her unmarked Ford Explorer, the engine roaring as she weaved through late-night traffic. In the passenger seat, Rex shifted restlessly. The 4-year-old German Shepherd had been her partner for 2 years, specially trained in victim assistance and evidence detection. His dark brown eyes reflected the streetlights as he sensed the urgency in Sarah's movements. Rex wasn't just a police dog, he was a therapy animal, trained to provide comfort to trauma victims, especially children. His gentle nature and intuitive understanding of human distress made him invaluable in situations like these. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured, reaching over to stroke Rex's head as they pulled into the apartment complex. "We've got work to do." The scene was chaos. 3 patrol cars had already arrived, their red and blue lights painting the shabby apartment building in alternating colors. Neighbors clustered on balconies and in doorways, some in bathrobes, others fully dressed as if they'd been afraid to sleep. Sarah could hear Officer Janet Rodriguez shouting into her radio, requesting an ambulance. "What do we have?" Sarah asked as she approached the building, Rex trotting calmly beside her. "Neighbor called it in about 20 minutes ago, officer," Rodriguez replied, her face grim. "Mrs. Chun from 1-4 said she heard a woman screaming for help, then a loud crash like furniture breaking. When we arrived, the door was locked, but we could hear crying inside sounded like a child." Sarah's jaw tightened. "The suspect?" Male voice was heard shouting earlier, but it's been quiet for the last 10 minutes. No response when we knocked and identified ourselves. Rodriguez paused, checking her notes. "Neighbors say it's the Thompson family. Marcus Thompson, 34, has a record 2 prior domestic violence arrests, but charges were dropped both times. His wife Lisa, 29, and their daughter Emma, who just turned 3 last month." Without another word, Sarah nodded to Rodriguez and approached the apartment door. The hallway smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. She could hear faint whimpering from inside, barely audible through the thin walls. Her training kicked, and as she assessed the situation, the door was solid but old, with a basic deadbolt that looked recently damaged. "Phoenix Police, open the door immediately," Sarah shouted, her voice echoing down the corridor. Silence. She waited 30 seconds, then nodded to Officer Martinez, who had joined them with a tactical ram. The door splintered on the first hit, swinging open to reveal a scene that would haunt Sarah for years to come. The small living room looked like a tornado had torn through it. A coffee table lay overturned, its glass top shattered across the worn carpet. A lamp hung at an awkward angle from its cord, and family photos were scattered everywhere, many with cracked frames and torn pictures. But it was the kitchen that made Sarah's breath catch. Dark red droplets led from the overturned dining table to where Lisa Thompson lay unconscious on the linoleum floor, her face swollen beyond recognition. Blood had pooled beneath her head, and her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. "Get those paramedics up here now," Sarah barked into her radio as she rushed to check Lisa's pulse. Weak but steady. The woman was breathing, which was more than Sarah had dared hope. That's when she heard it, a soft, hitching sound like a wounded animal trying not to be noticed. Sarah's head turned toward the living room, her eyes scanning the chaos until she spotted movement behind the overturned couch. There, wedged in the narrow space between the couch and the wall, was the smallest person Sarah had ever seen at a crime scene. Emma Thompson couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds soaking wet. Her blonde hair was matted with something Sarah hoped was just juice, and her little blue dress, the kind with cartoon princesses that 3-year-olds love, was torn at the shoulder. But it was her eyes that broke Sarah's heart, wide, terrified, and holding a kind of hurt that no child should ever experience. "Hey, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, crouching down and extending her hand. "I'm Sarah. I'm here to help you, and your mommy." Emma pressed herself further against the wall, her tiny body shaking. She stared at Sarah, but didn't make a sound, as if speaking might somehow make the nightmare continue. Sarah tried everything she'd learned in her crisis intervention training. She spoke in gentle tones, moved slowly, kept her hands visible. She even took off her police jacket, thinking the uniform might be frightening the child. Nothing worked. Emma remained frozen, silent, and utterly unreachable. The paramedics arrived, filling the small apartment with urgent voices and medical equipment. As they worked on Lisa, Sarah heard one of them mutter, "Jesus, what kind of animal does this to another human being?" The same question was running through Sarah's mind, along with another. Where was Marcus Thompson? That's when Rex made his move. The German shepherd had been sitting patiently by the door, observing everything with the quiet intelligence that made him such an effective therapy. Animal. Without any command from Sarah, he began walking slowly toward the couch, his tail held low and his head slightly tilted in the universal canine gesture of non-threat. Emma's eyes locked onto Rex immediately. For the first time since they'd found her, something flickered across her face, not fear, but curiosity. Rex approached with the patience of a saint, stopping about 3 feet away from her hiding spot. He sat down, tilted his head to one side, and let out the softest whine Sarah had ever heard him make. The transformation was immediate and miraculous. Emma's rigid posture relaxed slightly, and she tilted her head to mirror Rex's position. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, her small hand emerged from behind the couch, fingers extended toward the dog. Rex waited until she touched his snout before moving any closer. When he did, it was with the careful precision of a bomb disposal expert. He lay down flat on his belly and army crawled the remaining distance until Emma could bury her tiny fingers in his thick fur. For the first time since they'd broken down the door, Emma Thompson stopped, crying. She wrapped her arms around Rex's neck and whispered something so quietly that Sarah had to strain to hear it. "Nice doggy." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill down her cheeks as she watched the broken little girl find her first moment of peace in what had clearly been the worst night of her young life. She didn't know it yet, but she was witnessing the beginning of something that would change not just Emma's life, but the entire legal system's approach to child witnesses. Rex had just become more than a police dog. He'd become Emma's lifeline to the world of the living. Phoenix Children's Hospital had seen its share of trauma cases, but Emma Thompson's silence was unlike anything the staff had encountered. For 3 weeks, she hadn't spoken a single word. Not to the nurses who gently changed her bandages, not to the social workers who tried to engage her with toys, and certainly not to the detectives who needed her statement to build their case against her father. Dr. Rachel Chun, the hospital's leading child psychologist, sat in her office at 6 a.m., reviewing Emma's file for what felt like the 100th time. The little girl's physical injuries were healing: a fractured wrist, bruises along her ribs, and minor cuts from broken glass. But the psychological damage ran far deeper than anything an X-ray could reveal. She's exhibiting classic symptoms of selective mutism following severe trauma, Dr. Chun had explained to the case team during their weekly meeting. Children Emma's age process traumatic events differently than adults. Sometimes they simply shut down as a protective mechanism. What made Emma's case particularly heartbreaking was her complete withdrawal from human contact. She would eat if food was placed in front of her, but only when alone. She slept curled in the corner of her hospital bed, as far from the door as possible. During the day, she sat by the window, staring out at the parking lot with empty eyes that seemed far too old for her 3-year-old face. The Child Protective Services worker, Maria Santos, was growing desperate. "We can't keep her here indefinitely," she told Dr. Chun. "And we can't place her in foster care until we know she's psychologically stable. But more importantly, the D's office is pressuring us." Without Emma's testimony, Marcus Thompson might walk free. That was the cruel irony of the situation. Marcus Thompson had been arrested at a bar 6 blocks from his apartment, his knuckles still bleeding from the assault. He'd shown no remorse, even joking to arresting officers that his old lady finally learned to keep her mouth shut. But without Lisa Thompson's cooperation, she was too terrified to testify against her husband. And with only circumstantial evidence, the case was falling apart. Dr. Chun had tried everything in her considerable arsenal. Play therapy with dolls. That looked like Emma's family had resulted in the little girl throwing them violently across the room before retreating to her corner. Art therapy produced only black scribbles that looked like storm clouds. Even bringing in therapy puppets, usually a guaranteed hit with young children, had failed completely. "She's protecting herself the only way she knows how," Dr. Chun explained to Detective Martinez during one of their consultations. "By not speaking, she doesn't have to relive the trauma. But she also can't begin to heal." Detective Sarah Martinez visited Emma every few days, partly as part of the ongoing investigation, but increasingly out of genuine concern for the child. Each visit was more heartbreaking than the last. Emma would acknowledge Sarah's presence with a quick glance, but then return to her silent vigil by the window. It was during one of these visits that Sarah had an idea. She'd been telling her partner Rex about Emma during their daily walks, and she'd noticed how intently the dog listened, as if he somehow understood the gravity of the situation. Rex had been specifically trained to work with traumatized children. His certification included specialized courses in recognizing trauma responses and providing appropriate comfort. "What if I brought Rex to visit?" Sarah suggested to Dr. Chun during a particularly frustrating case review. She responded to him at a crime scene. "It might be worth a try." Dr. Chun was initially skeptical. Hospital policy regarding animals was strict, and there were liability concerns. But Emma's complete withdrawal was unprecedented. After several discussions with hospital administration and obtaining special permission, they decided to arrange a controlled visit. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, Sarah walked through the pediatric ward with Rex at her side. The dog seemed to sense the importance of the moment. His usual playful energy was replaced by focused calm. Other children in the ward brightened at the sight of the beautiful German Shepherd, but Rex's attention was entirely focused on the room at the end of the hall. Emma was in her usual position by the window when they entered. Dr. Chun watched from the doorway as Sarah unclipped Rex's leash and gave him a subtle hand signal. The dog approached Emma with the same careful patience he'd shown at the crime scene, stopping several feet away and sitting quietly. For the first time in weeks, Emma turned away from the window. Her eyes met Rex's, and something remarkable happened. The tension in her small shoulders relaxed slightly, and she tilted her head with what might have been curiosity. Rex waited. He'd been trained to let traumatized children set the pace, to never force interaction. Minutes passed in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, not the empty void Emma had been living in, but an expectant quiet, as if something important was about to happen. Then Emma did something she hadn't done since the night of the attack. She moved, not away from Rex, but toward him. One small step, then another, until she was close enough to reach out and touch his fur. The moment her fingers made contact with Rex's coat, Emma's face crumpled, and she began to cry. Not the silent tears that had occasionally leaked down her cheeks, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very center of her being. She threw her arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his fur, and let out weeks of suppressed anguish. Dr. Chun felt her own eyes filling with tears as she watched the breakthrough. This was what they'd been waiting for, the moment when Emma would finally allow herself to feel, and potentially, to heal. But what happened next shocked everyone in the room. Between her sobs, Emma began to whisper. The words were so soft they were almost inaudible, but Rex's keen ears picked up every syllable. His tail wagged slightly, encouraging her to continue. Daddy was so angry, Emma whispered into Rex's fur. He threw the table at Mommy. She made a scary sound. She pulled back slightly to look into Rex's warm brown eyes. There was red stuff everywhere, and Mommy wouldn't wake up. Dr. Chun's pen moved frantically across her notepad, capturing every precious word. After weeks of silence, Emma was finally ready to tell her story, but only to Rex. Sarah knelt down beside them, barely daring to breathe. Can you tell Rex what else happened that night, Emma? The little girl looked at Sarah briefly, then back at Rex. It was as if she understood that Rex was her translator to the human world, the one being she could trust to carry her words safely to the adults who needed to hear them. Daddy threw Mommy down the stairs, Emma continued, her voice growing slightly stronger. She hit her head on the wall. I hid behind the couch, because Daddy gets scary when he's angry. As Emma continued her whispered account to Rex, Dr. Chun realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a breakthrough in the child's treatment. It was the key to bringing a violent man to justice. But more importantly, it was a little girl's first step back from the edge of a psychological abyss, guided by the unwavering loyalty of a four-legged guardian angel. Rex had become more than Emma's comfort. He was her voice. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office buzzed with unusual tension on the morning of November 15th. Senior Prosecutor Janet Williams sat at her mahogany desk, surrounded by case files, legal precedents, and empty coffee cups that testified to another sleepless night. The Thompson case had become her obsession and her nightmare. Across from her sat Detective Sarah Martinez, looking equally exhausted. Between them lay the transcripts of Emma's whispered confessions to Rex 23. Pages of a 3-year-old's broken account of witnessing her father nearly kill her mother. It should have been enough to convict Marcus Thompson 10 times over. Instead, it might be completely inadmissible in court. Let me understand this correctly, Janet said, rubbing her temples. Our star witness will only speak to a dog. Our victim refuses to testify against her attacker. And our defendant's lawyer is claiming his client was nowhere near the apartment that night, despite being arrested 6 blocks away with bloody knuckles. Sarah nodded grimly. Michael Rodriguez filed a motion yesterday, claiming Marcus was at a bar all evening. He's produced 3 witnesses who swear they were drinking with him until closing time. Janet knew Rodriguez's reputation. The defense attorney was ruthless, brilliant, and completely without moral scruples when it came to defending violent men. He'd gotten wife-beaters acquitted before by systematically destroying their victims' credibility. His strategy was always the same: paint the victim as unstable, the witnesses as unreliable, and the police as incompetent. What about the bar's security footage? Conveniently corrupted, Sarah replied bitterly. Rodriguez claims it's proof of police tampering. The bar owner suddenly can't remember if Marcus was there or not. Janet stood and walked to her window, looking out at the courthouse across the street where justice was supposed to prevail. The irony wasn't lost on her that she could see the building where Marcus Thompson would likely walk free in a few weeks. What does Dr. Chun say about Emma testifying in traditional ways? She's adamant that forcing Emma to testify without Rex present would be psychological torture. The child has made remarkable progress, but only when the dog is with her. Take Rex away, and Emma retreats back into complete silence. The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Janet's secretary's voice came through the intercom. Mrs. Williams, Judge Patricia Sullivan's clerk, is on line 1. She wants to schedule a pretrial hearing about the unusual circumstances. Judge Sullivan was known throughout Arizona's legal community as Iron Pat, a no-nonsense jurist who'd spent 15 years on the bench and had seen every legal trick imaginable. If anyone could navigate the unprecedented situation, it was her. But even Judge Sullivan would be bound by centuries of legal precedent. That afternoon, the pretrial hearing drew a packed gallery. Word had spread through the legal community about the dog witness case, and attorneys from across the state had come to observe what might become landmark legal territory. The media had been barred from the proceedings, but Janet could see reporters clustered outside the courthouse, eager for any details. Marcus Thompson sat at the defendant's table, looking far different from the blood-soaked man who'd been arrested 3 weeks earlier. Rodriguez had cleaned him up, perfectly pressed shirt, conservative tie, freshly cut hair. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked like a respectable businessman, rather than a man who'd nearly beaten his wife to death. "Your Honor," Rodriguez began when called upon, "this entire proceeding is a mockery of jurisprudence. The prosecution wants to put a 3-year-old child on the witness stand, a child who, by their own admission, will only speak to an animal. This isn't testimony. It's a circus act designed to manipulate the jury's emotions." Rodriguez was in his element, his voice carrying the perfect blend of legal authority and righteous indignation. Furthermore, children of Emma Thompson's age are notoriously unreliable witnesses. Their memories are suggestible, their understanding of truth versus fantasy is undeveloped, and their accounts are easily influenced by leading questions or environmental factors. Janet felt her stomach tighten as Rodriguez continued his assault on Emma's credibility. The prosecution is asking this court to allow unprecedented courtroom theater. A police dog in the witness box? What's next, Your Honor? Psychic mediums? Ouija boards? The very presence of a law enforcement animal would prejudice any jury against my client before a single word of testimony is spoken. When Janet rose to respond, she could feel the weight of legal history pressing down on her shoulders. She knew that her next words would either save Emma Thompson's case or destroy it completely. "Your Honor, this case presents us with an extraordinary situation that requires extraordinary measures. Emma Thompson is not just any 3-year-old. She's a trauma survivor who has found the strength to speak truth to power, but only in the presence of the therapy animal who saved her from complete psychological collapse." Janet moved closer to the bench, her voice gaining strength. "The defense claims that allowing Rex in the courtroom would be prejudicial. I argue that denying Emma the support she needs to testify would be a travesty of justice. We're not talking about courtroom theater. We're talking about a child's fundamental right to be heard in a court of law." Judge Sullivan listened intently as Janet outlined the legal precedents from other states where therapy animals had been permitted in courtrooms. The cases were few, and most involved adult witnesses, but they established a foundation for accommodation when necessary to ensure testimony could be given. Dr. Chun's psychological evaluation clearly states that Emma cannot function without Rex present, Janet continued. This isn't a preference or a comfort issue. It's a medical necessity. The dog isn't just emotional support. He's Emma's lifeline to communication itself. Rodriguez was back on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow this, every defendant will claim their child witness needs emotional support animals. Where does it end? Comfort ponies? Therapy peacocks?" The courtroom erupted in nervous laughter, but Judge Sullivan's stern look quickly restored order. "Mr. Rodriguez raises valid concerns about precedent," the judge acknowledged. "However, Mrs. Williams makes an equally valid point about a witness's right to testify. This court has always balanced the defendant's right to a fair trial against the needs of justice itself." Judge Sullivan studied both attorneys for a moment before speaking. "I'm going to order a competency hearing for Emma Thompson to be conducted by a court-appointed child psychologist. I want an independent assessment of whether this child can provide reliable testimony and whether the presence of the therapy animal is truly necessary or merely convenient." As the hearing concluded, Janet felt a mixture of relief and dread. They'd avoided an immediate dismissal, but the battle was far from over. Outside the courthouse, she found Sarah waiting by her car, Rex sitting patiently in the passenger seat. "How did it go?" Sarah asked, though Janet's expression already provided the answer. "We live to fight another day," Janet replied, looking at Rex through the car window. The German shepherd gazed back at her with those intelligent brown eyes, as if he understood that his presence in a courtroom might determine whether a violent man would face justice. "But Rodriguez isn't wrong about one thing," Janet added grimly. "We're asking the court to make legal history. And history has a way of being written by whoever tells the most compelling story." By dawn on November 18th, his story had exploded across every major news network in America. "Toddler needs police dog to testify against abusive father," blazed across CNN's homepage. Fox News countered with "Courtroom Circus, when justice goes to the dogs." The case that had begun in a blood-splattered Phoenix apartment was now dominating national conversation. Detective Sarah Martinez discovered the media frenzy when she arrived at the police station to find 17 news vans blocking the parking lot. Reporters surged toward her car as she pulled in, shouting questions and thrusting microphones through her partially open window. "Detective Martinez, is it true you're trying to put a dog on the witness stand? How can a 3-year-old's testimony be reliable? Are you exploiting this child for publicity?" Sarah pushed through the crowd without comment, but inside the station, she found chaos. The phone system was overwhelmed with calls from reporters, legal experts, and advocacy groups. Captain Rodriguez pulled her into his office immediately. "Martinez, this thing has gone nuclear," he said, gesturing to the wall of televisions broadcasting live coverage from outside their building. "I've got the mayor's office breathing down my neck, internal affairs asking questions about procedure, and every talking head in America debating whether we've lost our minds." On the largest screen, a panel of legal experts was dissecting the case on Morning Justice, a popular legal talk show. Defense attorney turned television personality Marcus Kellerman was in full attack mode. "This is emotional manipulation of the highest order," Kellerman declared, his perfectly coiffed hair gleaming under the studio lights. "Prosecutors know they have a weak case, so they're turning to courtroom theatrics. What's next? Bringing in a circus to testify? This sets a precedent that will destroy the integrity of our legal system." The show's host, veteran journalist Patricia Moss, pushed back. "But what about the child's rights? Shouldn't Emma Thompson have the opportunity to be heard?" "Of course," Kellerman replied smoothly, "but not at the expense of constitutional protections. The defendant has a right to face his accusers, not their emotional support animals." Across town, prosecutor Janet Williams was discovering that media attention was a double-edged sword. Her office had been flooded with calls of support from domestic violence survivors and child advocacy groups, but an equal number of legal professionals were condemning her approach as grandstanding. The National Association of Criminal Defense lawyers had issued a statement calling the case a dangerous precedent that threatens fundamental legal principles. Meanwhile, the Children's Defense Fund praised Janet's innovative approach to ensuring child victims have a voice in the justice system. Dr. Rachel Chun found herself at the center of the psychological debate. Child development experts from Harvard to Stanford were weighing in on television and social media about trauma responses, selective mutism, and the therapeutic value of animal-assisted therapy. Some supported her assessment. Others questioned whether a 3-year-old could provide reliable testimony under any circumstances. The science is clear. Dr. Patricia Williamson from Johns Hopkins argued on expert analysis. Children Emma's age are highly susceptible to suggestion and fantasy thinking. Their memories are notoriously unreliable, especially following traumatic events. Dr. Chun, appearing via satellite from Phoenix, fired back. Dr. Williamson is citing outdated research. Recent studies show that children as young as 3 can provide accurate testimony about events they've experienced, particularly traumatic ones that create vivid memories. Emma's account has been consistent across multiple sessions. But it was social media where the battle truly raged. #JusticeForEmma trended nationwide, with thousands sharing stories of their own childhood trauma and praising Emma's courage. Counter hashtags like #DueProcess and #DefendTheDefendant gained traction among those concerned about legal proceeding. The case attracted unexpected attention from celebrities. Pop star Madison Gray tweeted to her 15 million followers, "This brave little girl deserves to be heard." Sometimes healing comes with 4 paws and unconditional love. #JusticeForEmma #BelieveSurvivors. Conservative commentator Jake Morrison responded, "Celebrity virtue signaling won't change the fact that this case is about constitutional rights, not feel-good stories. What happens when every criminal case becomes a popularity contest? #DueProcess. #ConstitutionMatters. The online debate turned vicious quickly. Emma's family received death threats from strangers who believed the case was fabricated. Marcus Thompson's supporters created Facebook groups claiming he was being railroaded by a feminist conspiracy within the justice system. Anonymous trolls doxed Dr. Chun, publishing her home address and encouraging harassment. Judge Patricia Sullivan faced her own bombardment. Her chambers received over 3,000 emails in 2 days, ranging from heartfelt pleas for Emma's rights to legal briefs from law school professors arguing constitutional points. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse daily, some supporting Emma, others defending Marcus Thompson's presumption of innocence. The judge's biggest concern wasn't the public pressure, but the growing media circus that threatened to overwhelm the case itself. She'd presided over high-profile trials before, but never one that generated this level of national attention for a pre-trial hearing. "Your Honor," she told her clerk, "I want a complete media blackout for all future proceedings. No cameras, no recording devices, and limited gallery seating. This case needs to be decided on legal merit, not public opinion." Meanwhile, in a secure location across town, Emma Thompson remained blissfully unaware that her story had captivated America. She spent her days in a temporary foster home, playing quietly with toys while Rex lay nearby, always within arm's reach. The 3-year-old understood that there were important grown-up meetings about her, but her world remained small and safe, bounded by Rex's protective presence. Child Protective Services worker Maria Santos was struggling to shield Emma from the media storm while preparing for what everyone now understood would be a landmark legal battle. "We've had to move her twice," Maria confided to Dr. Chun during one of their coordination meetings. Reporters found the first 2 placements. They're offering foster families money for exclusive interviews, for pictures, for anything connected to Emma. The case had also attracted legal heavy hitters. Harvard Law School's Constitutional Law Clinic offered to file amicus briefs supporting Emma's right to testify with accommodations. The American Civil Liberties Union was torn, with their Disability Rights Division supporting the accommodation while their criminal justice reform Advocates worried about defendants' rights. Michael Rodriguez, Marcus Thompson's defense attorney, was reveling in the attention. He'd given 17 television interviews in 3 days, each time hammering home his central message. The prosecution was using a child as a prop in an elaborate publicity stunt. "I feel sorry for Emma Thompson," Rodriguez told Anderson Cooper in a primetime interview. "She's been traumatized enough without being turned into a media sensation by prosecutors, who care more about headlines than justice." But Rodriguez had his own strategic reasons for courting publicity. Every expert who questioned child testimony reliability, every legal scholar who worried about precedent, every talking head who called the case a circus, all of it was potential ammunition for his defense. As the media storm intensified, one thing became clear. Emma Thompson's case was no longer just about domestic violence or child testimony. It had become a national referendum on justice, trauma, and the fundamental question of who deserves to be heard in America's courtrooms. The little girl who had whispered her truth to a therapy dog was now at the center of a legal and cultural earthquake that would reshape how the justice system treats its most vulnerable witnesses forever. December 3, 2024, would be remembered as the day American jurisprudence took an unprecedented turn. Judge Patricia Sullivan arrived at the Maricopa County Courthouse at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before her usual time, hoping to avoid the media circus that had transformed the building's entrance into a battlefield of competing ideologies. She had spent the previous 72 hours in isolation, reviewing every legal precedent, constitutional provision, and case law that might apply to Emma Thompson's situation. Her law clerks had compiled 847 pages of research from jurisdictions across the United States and several international courts. They had grappled with similar questions about vulnerable witnesses. The competency hearing for Emma had concluded the previous week with explosive results. Court-appointed psychologist Dr. Stephen Mitchell had spent 6 hours evaluating the 3-year-old, confirming Dr. Chun's assessment in devastating detail. His report, sealed from public view but leaked to select media outlets, painted a picture of a brilliant child whose trauma had created an unbreakable psychological dependence on Rex. Without the therapy animal present, Dr. Mitchell had written, the subject exhibits severe anxiety, selective mutism, and regression behaviors consistent with acute PTSD. However, with the animal present, she demonstrates remarkable clarity, consistent memory recall, and age-appropriate communication skills. By 7 a.m., the courthouse steps were packed with protesters. Pro-Emma demonstrators held signs reading, "Let children speak," and "Justice has 4 paws." Counter-protesters carried banners declaring, "Constitution first," and "Due process matters." Phoenix police had erected barriers to separate the groups, but tension crackled through the air like electricity before a storm. Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed beyond capacity despite Judge Sullivan's restrictions on attendance. Legal scholars from across the country had fought for seats alongside domestic violence advocates, children's rights activists, and criminal defense attorneys. The atmosphere was more like a Supreme Court hearing than a local criminal proceeding. Defense attorney Michael Rodriguez sat at his table, reviewing his final arguments. He had spent weeks building what he considered an airtight case against allowing Rex in the courtroom. His research had uncovered 17 different ways that the dog's presence could prejudice the jury, from the symbolic authority of police animals to the emotional manipulation of having a cute animal near a crying child. Prosecutor Janet Williams felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She knew that Judge Sullivan's decision would likely be appealed regardless of the outcome, potentially reaching the Supreme Court. Every word she spoke today might be analyzed by legal scholars for decades to come. At precisely 9 a.m., Judge Sullivan entered the courtroom. The packed gallery fell silent as she took her seat, her expression revealing nothing about the decision that had kept her awake for weeks. This case presents the court with a question that has no clear precedent in American jurisprudence. Judge Sullivan began, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. We must balance the fundamental right of the accused to a fair trial against the equally fundamental right of a witness to testify in a manner that allows their voice to be heard. She paused, looking directly at Marcus Thompson, who sat motionless. At the defense table, the defendant has a constitutional right to confront his accusers. This right is not negotiable and forms the bedrock of our adversarial legal system. Rodriguez felt a surge of confidence. The judge was laying the groundwork for his victory. However, Judge Sullivan continued, the prosecution has presented compelling evidence that their witness cannot exercise her right to testify without specific accommodations. The question before this court is whether those accommodations fundamentally compromise the defendant's rights. Janet Williams held her breath as the judge consulted her notes. After extensive research and careful consideration, I have found guidance in the Supreme Court's decision in Maryland v. Craig, which established that the Confrontation Clause does not guarantee criminal defendants an absolute right to face-to-face confrontation with witnesses during trial. The court recognized that competing interests, particularly the protection of child witnesses, may sometimes override this preference. The legal observers in the gallery began scribbling furiously. Judge Sullivan was citing one of the most controversial Supreme Court decisions regarding child testimony. However, Maryland v. Craig involved closed-circuit television testimony, not the presence of animals in the courtroom. This case requires us to venture into uncharted legal territory. Judge Sullivan stood, a gesture that emphasized the historic nature of her next words. I have also reviewed cases from family courts in Colorado, New York, and California, where therapy animals have been permitted during child custody proceedings. While these cases do not directly control, they establish a pattern of courts recognizing that traditional procedures may sometimes need modification to ensure that justice is actually served. Rodriguez was on the edge of his seat. The judge was building a legal foundation, but he couldn't tell which way she was leaning. The court has reviewed Dr. Mitchell's competency evaluation extensively. His findings are clear and undisputed. Emma Thompson cannot provide testimony without the presence of the therapy animal. The defense argues this creates an unacceptable prejudice. The prosecution argues this is a necessary accommodation. Judge Sullivan returned to her seat and looked directly at both legal teams. After careful consideration of all factors, including the defendant's constitutional rights, the witness's ability to testify, and the interests of justice, this court makes the following ruling. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning system seemed deafening. The therapy animal known as Rex will be permitted to be present during Emma Thompson's testimony, subject to the following strict conditions. The judge's voice grew stronger as she outlined her historic decision. First, the animal will be positioned behind a visual barrier so that the jury cannot see him during testimony. Second, the animal will wear no police identification or equipment that might suggest law enforcement authority. Third, the prosecution may not reference the animal's police training or law enforcement role. Fourth, the defense will have the right to voir dire the jury extensively about any potential bias related to animals or children. Rodriguez shot to his feet. Your Honor, I must object in the strongest possible terms. This decision violates my client's fundamental constitutional rights and creates a prejudicial atmosphere that makes a fair trial impossible. Your objection is noted for the record, Mr. Rodriguez. However, this court believes these accommodations adequately protect the defendant's rights while allowing a crucial witness to testify. The alternative, silencing a witness who has relevant testimony due to trauma, would be a greater injustice than the accommodations required. Judge Sullivan's gavel came down with finality. Furthermore, I am ordering that this decision be stayed pending appeal, which I fully expect the defense to file. The Supreme Court may ultimately need to resolve these questions definitively. As court adjourned, the legal observers rushed for the exits to report the historic decision. Outside, the competing crowds of protesters erupted into cheers and jeers as news of the ruling spread. Television reporters went live with breaking news bulletins that would dominate the news cycle for days. Judge Sullivan remained in her chambers for an additional hour, knowing that her decision would be dissected, criticized, and potentially overturned. But she also knew that sometimes the law must evolve to serve justice, even when that evolution comes with risk and controversy. Emma Thompson, still unaware that legal history had been made in her name, spent the afternoon playing with blocks while Rex dozed nearby, both of them blissfully ignorant that their bond had just changed American jurisprudence forever. January 15th, 2025. The day that would forever change how America's legal system protects its youngest witnesses had arrived with unseasonable warmth in Phoenix. By 6 a.m., news trucks lined every available parking space within 6 blocks of the Maricopa County Courthouse, their satellite dishes reaching toward a cloudless sky like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Emma Thompson woke up in her temporary foster home, unaware that millions of Americans would be following her story throughout the day. At 3 years and 4 months old, she understood only that today was the day she would see Rex again, and then that some very important grown-ups wanted to hear about the scary night. Her foster mother, Patricia Martinez, no relation to Detective Sarah Martinez, had spent weeks preparing Emma for this moment, with gentle explanations and picture books about courtrooms. "Remember, sweetheart," Patricia said as she helped Emma into her carefully chosen outfit, a simple blue dress that Dr. Chun had specifically selected to appear neither too childish nor too formal. "Rex will be right there with you. You just need to tell the nice people what happened, just like you told Rex before." Emma nodded solemnly, clutching a small stuffed elephant that had become her security object during the months of preparation. She didn't understand words like testimony or cross-examination, but she understood that telling the truth was important and that Rex would protect her while she did it. At the courthouse, an unprecedented security operation was underway. Judge Sullivan had ordered the building cleared of all non-essential personnel. Metal detectors had been reinforced, and plainclothes officers were stationed throughout the gallery to monitor for any disruptions. The judge had made it clear that any outburst, any unauthorized recording, any attempt to intimidate the child witness would result in immediate contempt charges and ejection. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at 7:30 a.m. with Rex, who seemed to sense the gravity of the day. The German Shepherd was unusually calm, his training and instincts telling him that his partner was nervous about something important. Sarah had barely slept, knowing that everything they had worked for over the past 3 months would be decided in the next few hours. "How are you holding up?" Prosecutor Janet Williams asked as they met in a secure room adjacent to the courtroom. Janet looked exhausted, but determined. The past week had been a whirlwind of final preparations, jury selection, and media management. The jury they had finally seated consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 24 to 67, representing a cross-section of Phoenix's population. "Rex is ready," Sarah replied, stroking the dog's head. "The question is whether the system is ready for Rex." Defense attorney Michael Rodriguez had spent the morning in his own final preparations, but his confidence had been shaken during jury selection. Despite his best efforts, he hadn't been able to eliminate jurors who showed obvious sympathy for child abuse victims. The graphic photos of Lisa Thompson's injuries, already admitted into evidence, had clearly affected potential jurors during voir dire. At 9 a.m. sharp, Judge Sullivan called the court to order. The gallery was packed with legal observers, journalists, no cameras allowed, domestic violence advocates, and members of Emma's extended family who had traveled from across the country to support her. Lisa Thompson sat in the front row, her face still bearing faint scars from the attack 4 months earlier. She had finally found the courage to leave her husband, though she remained too traumatized to testify herself. Marcus Thompson sat at the defense table, his appearance carefully crafted to project innocence. Rodriguez had coached him extensively on courtroom demeanor, no angry expressions, no intimidating stares toward the victim's family, no reactions that might alienate the jury. But those who knew Thompson's history could see the rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "A prosecution may call its first witness," Judge Sullivan announced. "Your Honor, the people call Emma Thompson." The courtroom fell into absolute silence as the massive double doors opened. Emma walked slowly between Detective Martinez and child advocate Maria Santos, her small hand clutching the stuffed elephant. Every eye in the courtroom followed the tiny figure as she made her way toward the witness stand. The custom witness box that had been constructed for the trial was a marvel of judicial accommodation. Lower than standard height, with a small chair that allowed Emma's feet to touch the floor, and positioned so that she couldn't see Marcus Thompson directly. Behind the witness box, separated by a specially constructed wooden screen with a small opening, Rex waited patiently. As Emma climbed into the witness box, her eyes immediately found Rex through the opening in the screen. The change in her demeanor was visible to everyone in the courtroom. Her shoulders relaxed, her grip on the elephant loosened, and for the first time since entering the room, she smiled. Judge Sullivan leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but clear. "Emma, do you understand what it means to tell the truth?" Emma nodded. "It means not lying. Mommy says lying is bad." "That's right. And do you promise to tell the truth today?" "Yes, ma'am." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, every word carried clearly. Janet Williams approached the witness box slowly, holding a picture book that Dr. Chun had helped create specifically for this testimony. The book contained simple drawings of Emma's family and their apartment, designed to help the child navigate her memories without re-traumatizing her. "Emma, can you tell us your name?" "Emma Rose Thompson. I'm 3 years old." She held up 3 fingers proudly. "Emma, do you remember the night when Daddy and Mommy had a big fight?" The little girl's expression grew serious, and she turned slightly toward Rex, who made a soft, encouraging sound that only she could hear. "Yes, it was very scary." "Can you tell us what you remember about that night?" Emma took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on Rex through the screen opening. "Daddy was yelling real loud. Mommy was crying. I was in my room, but the yelling was too loud." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, the presence of Rex giving her the courage to speak truths that had been locked inside her for months. "I came out to see what was happening. Daddy was throwing things. The table got broken. What happened to Mommy?" Emma's voice became very small, but she pressed on. "Daddy pushed Mommy down the stairs. She hit her head on the wall, and there was red stuff. Lots of red stuff." The courtroom was transfixed. Several jurors were wiping their eyes as they listened to the 3-year-old's matter-of-fact recounting of witnessing attempted murder. "Where were you when this happened, Emma?" "I hid behind the couch. I was very scared. Mommy wouldn't wake up." Janet Williams continued her gentle questioning for 20 more minutes, allowing Emma to tell her story in her own words and at her own pace. The child's testimony was devastating in its innocence and clarity. She described details that only someone present could have known: the sound of her mother's head hitting the wall, the way her father's face looked scary and red, the position of her mother's body at the bottom of the stairs. Throughout it all, Rex remained a calm, steady presence behind the screen. Occasionally, Emma would look toward him and seem to draw strength from his unwavering gaze. The courtroom could see The extraordinary bond between the traumatized child and the therapy animal who had become her voice. When Janet Williams concluded her direct examination, every person in the courtroom understood they had witnessed something unprecedented in American jurisprudence. A 3-year-old had just provided some of the most compelling testimony anyone had ever heard, made possible only by the presence of a 4-legged guardian angel who had given her the courage to speak truth to power. But now came the moment everyone had been dreading: cross-examination. The courtroom held its collective breath as defense attorney Michael Rodriguez rose from his chair. He had spent 3 sleepless nights crafting his cross-examination strategy, knowing that his next few minutes would determine whether Marcus Thompson walked free or spent the next decade in prison. Rodriguez was a master at dismantling witness testimony, but he had never faced a 3-year-old whose every word was protected by the watchful eyes of a German shepherd. Rodriguez approached the witness stand with calculated precision, his expensive suit and polished demeanor designed to project authority without appearing threatening. He had studied child psychology extensively for this moment, understanding that his usual aggressive tactics would backfire spectacularly with both the jury and Judge Sullivan. "Hello, Emma," Rodriguez began, his voice artificially warm. "My name is Mr. Rodriguez. I just want to ask you a few questions, okay?" Emma looked at him with the frank curiosity of a 3-year-old, then glanced toward Rex for reassurance. The dog's steady presence seemed to give her confidence. "Okay," she replied simply. Rodriguez had decided on a strategy of gentle confusion rather than direct confrontation. His goal was to demonstrate that Emma's memory was unreliable without appearing to attack a traumatized child. "Emma, you said this happened at nighttime, right? Was it dark outside?" "Yes, it was dark. I was supposed to be sleeping. And when it's dark, sometimes it's hard to see things clearly, isn't it?" Prosecutor Janet Williams tensed. She could see where Rodriguez was heading, but Emma's answer surprised everyone. "The lights were on inside," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy always turns on all the lights when he's mad. He says he wants to see everything." Rodriguez's first attempt at undermining her testimony had backfired. He quickly shifted tactics. "Emma, you love your daddy, don't you?" The little girl's expression grew troubled. "Sometimes, but not when he's scary. And you don't want your daddy to get in trouble, do you?" Emma turned toward Rex, her small brow furrowed in confusion. "Daddy is already in trouble. He hurt Mommy." Rodriguez felt sweat beading on his forehead. Every question he asked seemed to reinforce Emma's credibility rather than undermine it. He decided to press harder, hoping to overwhelm the child with complex questions. "Emma, have people been asking you about that night many times?" "Yes. Dr. Chun asks me. And the nice lady with the papers." Emma was referring to the social worker and prosecutor who had interviewed her. "And did they tell you what to say?" "They told me to tell the truth." "But Emma, sometimes grown-ups can make us remember things differently than they really happened. Sometimes they can make us think we saw things we didn't really see." Emma's confusion was visible, and she turned more fully toward Rex. The dog seemed to sense her distress and made a soft whining sound that only she could hear. The bond between them was palpable to everyone in the courtroom. Rodriguez saw his opening. If he could show that the child was more influenced by the dog than by actual memory, he might be able to discredit her testimony entirely. "Emma, you really like Rex, don't you?" "Yes, Rex is my best friend." "And Rex makes you feel safe?" "Yes." "Emma, when you talk to Rex, does he ever tell you what to say?" The question was designed to suggest that Emma's testimony was the result of influence rather than memory. But Emma's response would become the most quoted moment in child witness testimony history. The little girl looked at Rodriguez with the patient expression children use when explaining something obvious to a confused adult. Then she turned toward Rex, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "Rex, tell the mean man that Daddy hurt Mommy real bad, and it made me very scared." The courtroom erupted in gasps and muffled sobs. Several jurors openly wept. In her 3-year-old logic, Emma believed Rex could speak for her, could validate her truth to the skeptical adult who was questioning her memories. But she wasn't finished. As Rodriguez stood frozen, unsure how to respond to such devastating innocence, Emma continued talking to Rex as if he were her personal translator to the adult world. "Tell him about the red stuff, Rex. Tell him how Mommy wouldn't wake up, and I hid behind the couch because I was scared Daddy would be mad at me too." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke to Rex, the dog's presence giving her the courage to articulate trauma that had been locked inside her for months. "Tell him that Daddy's face was scary and red, and he was saying bad words. Tell him that Mommy made a really scary sound when she hit the wall." Rodriguez was trapped. Any attempt to interrupt Emma's heartbreaking monologue to Rex would make him appear monstrous to the jury. But allowing it to continue was destroying his client's case with every word. Judge Sullivan was equally trapped. Technically, Emma was answering Rodriguez's questions, just not in the way anyone had anticipated. The child's responses were devastatingly honest and clearly the product of genuine memory rather than coaching. Emma turned back to Rodriguez, her expression earnest. "Rex says you should believe me because I'm telling the truth. Rex knows I don't lie." The simplicity of her statement cut through every legal complexity, every constitutional argument, every doubt about child testimony reliability. In that moment, the courtroom understood that they were witnessing pure truth, spoken by someone too young to lie effectively, too innocent to manipulate, and too traumatized to speak without the support of her 4-legged guardian. Rodriguez made one final, desperate attempt. "Emma, do you understand that your daddy could go away for a very long time if people believe what you're saying?" Emma's response would be replayed on news broadcasts for weeks afterward. She looked directly at Rodriguez, then at her father. For the first time during her testimony, her small voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "Daddy already went away. He went away when he hurt Mommy. I want the daddy who reads me stories back, not the scary daddy." The profound wisdom in those words from a 3-year-old left the courtroom in stunned silence. Marcus Thompson, who had maintained his composed facade throughout the trial, finally cracked. His face contorted with rage as he half rose from his chair before Rodriguez, and a bailiff quickly restrained him. That brief moment of unveiled fury, witnessed by the jury immediately after Emma's innocent testimony, sealed his fate more effectively than any evidence or expert witness could have. Rodriguez knew his cross-examination was over. Any further questions would only deepen the hole he had inadvertently dug. "No further questions, Your Honor," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, as Emma was helped down from the witness stand. She looked back at Rex one final time. "Thank you for helping me be brave," she whispered. The dog's tail wagged slightly, as if he understood that together they had just changed history. The courtroom remained silent for a long moment. After Emma left, everyone understanding that they had witnessed something unprecedented. A 3-year-old child, supported by an extraordinary therapy animal, had just delivered testimony that would be studied in law schools for generations to come. But more than that, Emma Thompson had proven that truth when spoken with courage. And innocence has a power that transcends all legal maneuvering and constitutional complexity. Sometimes the most profound statements about justice come from the smallest voices, speaking their truth to the one being who makes them feel safe, enough to remember, and brave enough to speak. The jury deliberated for just 47 minutes. It was the shortest deliberation for a felony assault case in Maricopa County history, a reflection of how powerfully Emma's testimony had resonated with the 12 men and women who held Marcus Thompson's fate in their hands. When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, his voice was steady, but his eyes were still red from the tears he had shed during Emma's testimony. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Thompson, guilty of aggravated assault in the first degree." The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and sobs. Lisa Thompson collapsed into her sister's arms, finally able to breathe freely for the first time in months. Detective Sarah Martinez felt Rex's head nudge her hand, as if the dog understood that justice had finally been served. 3 weeks later, Judge Sullivan sentenced Marcus Thompson to 15 years in prison, the maximum allowed under Arizona law. But it was her words during sentencing that would be quoted in legal journals for decades to come. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Sullivan said, looking directly at the defendant, "your actions that night were witnessed by the one person who loved you unconditionally, your 3-year-old daughter. That you would commit such violence in front of a child speaks to a depravity that demands the full measure of justice this court can provide." She paused, then continued with words that would define her legacy on the bench. "This case has reminded us all that justice is not merely about legal procedures and constitutional rights, though those remain paramount. It is about ensuring that every voice can be heard, no matter how small, no matter how vulnerable." The impact of Emma's case rippled across the American legal landscape with unprecedented speed. Within 6 months, the Arizona legislature had passed Emma's Law, officially known as the Child Witness Protection Act. The law established comprehensive guidelines for accommodating therapy animals in courtrooms when child witnesses required them, creating a framework that balanced defendants' constitutional rights with children's psychological needs. The legislation was championed by State Senator Maria Rodriguez, no relation to the defense attorney, herself a survivor of childhood abuse. Emma Thompson's courage in that courtroom has given voice to thousands of children who previously suffered. In silence, Senator Rodriguez declared during the bill signing ceremony, "We cannot let legal technicalities silence the most vulnerable members of our society." But Arizona was just the beginning. Within 2 years, 37 states had adopted similar legislation, each bill bearing some variation of Emma's name. Legal scholars dubbed it the Emma effect, the rapid transformation of child witness laws across America sparked by one little girl's testimony. The case attracted international attention as well. The European Court of Human Rights cited Emma's case in a landmark decision, allowing therapy animals for traumatized witnesses. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child incorporated language about accommodating support animals for child witnesses in judicial proceedings. Detective Sarah Martinez and Rex found themselves at the center of this legal revolution. The Phoenix Police Department, recognizing the historic significance of their partnership, established the nation's first specialized K-9 child witness program. Sarah was promoted to lieutenant and given oversight of the unit, which quickly expanded from 1 dog to 12 specially trained therapy animals. "What people don't understand," Sarah explained during a training conference attended by law enforcement officials from 43 states, "is that Rex didn't just help Emma testify. He gave her back her voice, her sense of safety in a world that had become terrifying." Rex, now 5 years old and sporting distinguished gray patches around his muzzle, became the most famous police dog in America. Children's books were written about his friendship with Emma. Documentary filmmakers followed his work with other traumatized children. But Rex seemed most content during quiet moments with young witnesses, providing the same calm, steady presence that had transformed Emma's life. The program's success was measured not just in convictions, but in healing. Of the 347 children who testified with therapy animal support in the first 2 years of the program, 89% showed significant improvement in trauma symptoms, according to follow-up psychological evaluations. More importantly, 312 violent offenders were convicted based on testimony that might never have been heard without the program. Emma herself, now 5 years old, had blossomed into a confident, articulate child who showed no signs of the selective mutism that had once silenced her. She attended kindergarten at a private school that specialized in children who had experienced trauma, where her teachers marveled at her resilience and emotional intelligence. Every month, Emma visited Rex at the police station. Their bond as strong as ever. During one such visit, watched by Lieutenant Martinez and Dr. Chun, Emma explained to a group of police officers why Rex was so special. Rex taught me that telling the truth isn't scary when someone you trust is with you, the 5-year-old said with remarkable poise. He helped me remember that I'm brave, even when bad things happen. The officers, hardened by years of dealing with society's worst crimes, found themselves moved to tears by the wisdom of the child who had become their inspiration. Dr. Rachel Chun, now director of the National Center for Child Witness Advocacy, often reflected on how one case had transformed her entire field. Emma's testimony fundamentally changed how we think about trauma and healing. She explained during a keynote address at the American Psychological Association's annual conference. She showed us that children don't just need protection, they need empowerment. And sometimes empowerment comes with forepaws and unconditional love. The legal precedent established by Judge Sullivan's decision had withstood every challenge. The Supreme Court declined to hear Marcus Thompson's appeal, effectively endorsing the accommodations made for Emma's testimony. Legal scholars predicted that the case would be taught in constitutional law classes for generations, representing the evolution of the justice system to protect its most vulnerable participants. Lisa Thompson, now remarried to a gentleman who adored both her and Emma, established the Emma Rose Foundation, a non-profit organization that provided therapy animals for traumatized children in family court proceedings. The foundation's motto, suggested by Emma herself, was simple but profound. Everyone deserves to be heard. On the 5-year anniversary of that terrible night that had started everything, Emma, now 8 years old, stood before a crowd of 2,000 people at the Foundation's annual gala. Rex, now showing his age but still dignified, sat beside her on the stage. The audience included judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, child advocates, and hundreds of survivors of domestic violence. My friend Rex taught me something very important, Emma said, her voice clear and strong as it carried through the packed auditorium. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Being brave means telling the truth even when you are scared, because the truth helps other people too. She paused, looking down at Rex, who gazed back at her with the same patient love he had shown that first night in a blood-splattered apartment. Rex showed me that love is stronger than fear, and truth is stronger than silence. If a 3-year-old and a dog can change how justice works, imagine what all of us can do together. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. In the front row, Judge Sullivan, now retired, wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the child whose case had defined her judicial legacy. Detective Lieutenant Martinez beamed with pride at both Emma and Rex, knowing that their partnership had transformed not just one little girl's life, but the entire American legal system. As the applause finally died down, Emma knelt beside Rex and whispered something in his ear. Those close enough to hear caught her words. "Thank you for teaching me to be brave. Rex, thank you for helping me save other kids too." Rex's tail wagged softly, as if he understood that their story, a story that had begun in trauma and terror, had become a beacon of hope for countless children who needed to find their own voices in the pursuit of justice. Sometimes the most profound changes in society begin with the smallest voices, speaking truth to power with the help of an unlikely guardian angel, who just happens to have 4 paws and an infinite capacity for love.